Think back to last night. You laid your head on the pillow. You felt the weight of the entire day finally leave your body. Your eyes got heavy, the room went quiet, and then nothing. A total blank. You remember the before. You definitely remember the after, because here you are right now, awake, watching this. But that exact moment in between, the precise second your consciousness flickered out like a candle, is a complete black hole. There's no fade to black you can actually recall. There's no slow, blurry countdown of thoughts getting hazier and hazier until you finally drift off. 1 second you're lying there thinking about something completely random. Stop. Maybe replaying an awkward conversation from 3 years ago for absolutely no reason, and the next thing you know, it's morning. It's like a scene got physically cut out of the movie of your life, and nobody told you. You've done this every single night since the day you were born. You have fallen asleep more times than you've eaten a meal, and yet you cannot, not even once, tell me what it actually felt like the moment it happened. So here's the real question. Is this a glitch? Is your brain just badly designed, failing to record one of the most important transitions you go through every day? Or is your mind doing this on purpose, deliberately hiding something from you, night after night, for reasons that go a lot deeper than, you were just tired? Stick around, because the answer gets stranger the closer you look at it. Before we get into the amnesia of sleep, quick favor. If you have ever woken up in a completely different position than the one you fell asleep in, on your back, then somehow face down with one leg hanging off the bed, hit that subscribe button right now. It means your brain was doing a whole lot more last night than you're aware of. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of biological mystery this channel exists for. We're building something here, a place where the weird, unexplainable stuff your body does every single day actually gets explained properly. Every subscriber helps us keep going. Subscribed? Good. Let's actually get into the science, because this is one of the strangest corners of neuroscience you'll ever come across. Let's start with what's physically happening inside your skull as the day goes on, because it's a lot more dramatic than I'm just sleepy. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, your brain is burning fuel nonstop, and every bit of that mental effort leaves behind a chemical byproduct called adenosine. Adenosine doesn't just appear and disappear. It builds up, slowly, continuously, hour after hour. Think of it like a tab at a bar that you're not allowed to close until bedtime. The longer you stay awake, the bigger that tab gets. Stop. And adenosine isn't a passive bystander sitting quietly in the background. It actively suppresses the brain's arousal systems, the very systems keeping you sharp, alert, and functional. That's why by 9 p.m., your eyelids suddenly weigh about 4 pounds each, and complex sentences start to feel like a personal attack. This, by the way, is also exactly why caffeine works. Coffee doesn't inject you with energy from nowhere. It blocks adenosine receptors, so your brain simply can't read the "you are exhausted" memo anymore. You're not more awake. You're just temporarily unaware of how tired you actually are. Something worth thinking about the next time you're on your 4th cup, insisting you're totally fine. Running alongside all of this is your circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour clock, controlled by a tiny cluster of cells in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. As night creeps in, this internal clock starts dialing down your alertness signals on its own schedule, regardless of how much caffeine you've had. The pineal gland starts releasing melatonin. Your core body temperature dips slightly. Your entire internal chemistry begins leaning away from wakefulness and towards sleep like a slow tide pulling out. And then, When the conditions finally line up, something almost mechanical happens. A cluster of neurons in a region called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus flips like a switch and starts actively suppressing the brain systems responsible for keeping you awake. It shuts down the chemical messengers, norepinephrine, serotonin, histamine, that had been keeping your alertness dial turned up all day. Your brain, in a very real sense, talks itself off the ledge of wakefulness, and it's during this exact chemical negotiation that something critical happens to a structure that's about to explain this entire mystery. Your thalamus. Under normal waking conditions, your thalamus works like the world's busiest relay station. Everything you see, hear, feel, and sense passes directly through it on the way to your cortex, the part of your brain responsible for actually experiencing and understanding all of it. The thalamus is the reason a sound outside registers as car driving past instead of just noise. It's the reason you can feel the blanket on your skin and know consciously that's what you're feeling. It never stops routing information from the outside world into the parts of your brain that think, perceive, and remember. When you start falling asleep, the thalamus essentially closes the gate. A structure called the reticular thalamic nucleus begins inhibiting the thalamus's relay cells, progressively cutting off the flow of sensory information headed to the cortex. Your phone buzzing across the room, the hum of the air conditioner, your partner's breathing next to you, all of it simply stops being forwarded upstairs. Your cortex, the seat of conscious experience and memory formation, starts getting starved of input. And without input, it cannot form new memories in any coherent, retrievable way. This is honestly most of the answer, right here. You cannot remember falling asleep, because falling asleep is your brain actively dismantling its own ability to record experience. The thalamus stops relaying. The cortex goes quiet. The machinery responsible for encoding memory shuts down before you're even fully unconscious. Picture trying to film a video on a phone with a dying battery. The footage from the final few seconds is going to be corrupted, glitchy, or missing entirely. Not because nothing happened in front of the camera, but because the recording hardware gave out mid-shot. That's your brain, every single night. To really understand this memory gap, you need to meet the brain's librarian, the hippocampus. This is the structure responsible for taking short-term experiences floating around in your head and physically filing them away into long-term storage. It's the reason you can remember what you had for breakfast or the name of someone you met an hour ago. Here's the problem. As you start to drift off, the hippocampus is one of the very first systems to clock out for the night. Imagine a security guard at a museum who quietly switches off all the cameras 10 minutes before the doors are actually locked. People could still be wandering the halls. Things could still technically be happening, but none of it is being recorded anymore. That's your hippocampus during sleep onset. It essentially stops saving the last few minutes of wakefulness because it's already busy prepping for the deep structural maintenance work it needs to do overnight. Researchers actually have a term for this kind of memory failure. It resembles a mild, nightly version of retrograde amnesia, a gap that swallows the events immediately preceding a loss of consciousness, the same way a head injury can wipe out the minutes right before impact. Except this impact happens to you on purpose, every night, by design. Here's where this gets genuinely bizarre. Your brain doesn't simply power down like flipping a light switch. There's a transitional phase, arguably the most underrated, scientifically fascinating experience every single human being goes through nightly, called hypnagogia. Technically, this is stage 1 sleep. And the wild part is, most people have absolutely no idea it's happening to them. During this window, which can last anywhere from a handful of seconds to several minutes, the cortex isn't fully asleep yet. The thalamus is closing the gate, but it hasn't slammed it shut. And in that strange, liminal in-between zone, your brain starts generating spontaneous, involuntary sensory experiences. Hallucinations, essentially, even though that word sounds far more alarming than it needs to. Researchers who deliberately wake people up during this exact phase report things like geometric shapes drifting silently across their vision, sudden flashes of faces or unfamiliar places, the sound of their own name being called from nowhere, or a random fragment of a song. And then there's the most famous one of all, the sudden, vivid sensation of falling, immediately followed by a violent whole-body jerk that snaps you straight back to alertness. That's the hypnic jerk, or sleep start. And somewhere between 60 and 70% of people experience it regularly. You know the one. You're calmly drifting off, and suddenly you're plummeting off a ledge that doesn't exist. Your entire body convulses, and your partner sits up, asking what on earth is wrong with you. There isn't a fully settled scientific explanation for why this happens, though one popular theory suggests your brain misreads the sudden muscle relaxation of sleep onset as evidence that your body is actually falling, and fires off a rapid, panicked correction signal to every major muscle group, telling them to catch you immediately. Whether or not that theory is exactly right, the response itself is instant and completely undignified. During hypnagogia, the visual association areas of your cortex stay unusually active, generating vivid imagery without any real visual input to anchor it. Your temporal lobes involved in processing sound also show a burst of activity, which may be why people sometimes hear voices, names, or music that was never actually playing. And here's the part that ties directly back into our original question. Almost nobody wakes up the next morning with any memory of this. Not because it didn't happen, it absolutely did, but because the very memory encoding systems needed to store it were already shutting down while it was occurring. Some research on stage 1, N1 sleep, actually suggests this phase is associated with increased forgetting, not memory formation. So every single night, you experience a genuine, private hallucination, potentially involving geometric light shows and a dramatic, false sensation of plummeting through the floor. And you remember absolutely none of it. It isn't only about which brain regions are going quiet. There's also a complete chemical overhaul happening underneath all of it. To form any memory at all, your brain relies heavily on a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Levels of this chemical stay high while you're awake and actively learning, paying attention, up, and encoding new information. It's part of what makes a memory stick in the first place. As you fall asleep, your acetylcholine levels drop off a cliff. In their place, inhibitory chemicals like adenosine and GABA flood in and take over. Without that acetylcholine acting as a kind of memory glue, the final moments before unconsciousness simply have nothing to hold on to. Think about what that actually means. Your brain never wrote that file to the hard drive in the first place. There was never a memory there to lose. It's the difference between a photo that gets deleted and a photo that was never taken because the camera's memory card had already been pulled out. Here's what makes all of this even harder to wrap your head around. Falling asleep isn't a clean, sharp line you cross all at once. It's messy, staggered, and gradual, and different regions of your brain don't cross that line at the same time. Sleep researchers actually describe sleep onset as a local phenomenon. Certain patches of your cortex can slip into something resembling a sleep state, while other patches are still showing fully awake activity right next door. This is exactly why, if you've ever caught yourself nodding off somewhere embarrassing, a lecture hall, a long meeting, your cousin's 3-hour wedding speech, you sometimes have this vague, foggy impression of something happening just before you jolted back awake. Your motor cortex may have still been alert, while your prefrontal cortex had already quietly left the building. Your auditory regions might have kept picking up sound while your frontal lobes had gone dark. The exact moment of sleep onset, the specific instant you'd actually need to remember in order to remember falling asleep, isn't really one single moment at all. It's a rolling, region-by-region shutdown. And by the time the areas responsible for memory and self-awareness finally go offline, the areas that would have recorded that transition have already stopped functioning. The observer is the last one to leave, and it leaves before it can write anything down. So why would evolution design a brain that erases one of its own most important nightly transitions? Picture the alternative for a second. Imagine if you remembered every second of drifting off, the gradual loss of muscle control, the slowing heartbeat, the strange floating hallucinations, the phantom falling sensation and violent jerk. That could genuinely be terrifying, or at minimum, wildly overstimulating every single night of your life. By quietly deleting the transition, your brain preserves a seamless, uninterrupted narrative of who you are. You go to sleep as yourself and wake up as yourself, without the static confusion or low-grade panic of consciously experiencing your own shutdown sequence. There's also a more practical angle. Sleep itself is a memory consolidation process. Overnight, your brain is busy selectively strengthening certain memories from the day while quietly discarding others, essentially performing routine maintenance, keeping what seems useful, pruning what doesn't. This process is highly selective. Your brain isn't blindly reinforcing everything that happened to you. And the actual experience of transitioning into sleep, the dim, drowsy, fading final minutes of consciousness, contains no useful information, no emotional weight, nothing remotely survival relevant. It's just the sensation of lying in the dark, getting progressively hazier. Your brain is a ruthlessly efficient editor, and across every human being and every night in recorded history, it has made the same executive decision. The footage of falling asleep ends up on the cutting room floor. Meanwhile, your hippocampus, the same structure that clocked out early on new memories, actually shows unusual activity during this transition. Something researchers believe might be a kind of rapid overnight sorting process. But this isn't new memory being formed. It's closer to the day's recent memories being tagged, evaluated, and filed. Your hippocampus at sleep onset behaves like an overnight editor going through the footage and deciding what actually makes the final cut. And the act of editing never makes it into the movie itself. There's one more layer here that makes this whole picture even stranger. Sleep researchers have a term for something called sleep state misperception, sometimes referred to as paradoxical insomnia, POP. It describes people who are absolutely convinced they barely slept a wink, who wake up certain they were awake for most of the night, despite objective brainwave monitoring in a sleep lab, showing they were asleep for a completely normal amount of time. This isn't just your brain being unreliable, although it clearly is that too. It reveals something deeper. Your subjective sense of being awake or asleep is genuinely not trustworthy. Some people swear they heard every single minute of the night ticking past. They insist they were lying there fully conscious. But the EEG, the objective brainwave readout, POP, tells a completely different story. They were in stage 1, stage 2, sometimes even deeper sleep, while their subjective experience insisted they were wide awake the entire time. Your brains actually stop. Your brain's actual state and your brain's own internal story about that state can come apart completely. The machinery can slip fully into sleep mode while the little narrator inside your head keeps running commentary, insisting nothing has changed, right up until, presumably, stop. Even that narrator quietly steps away from the microphone and the commentary simply stops. And you never notice, because by definition, you're asleep. Sit with this for a second. Stop, because it's stranger than it first sounds. The fact that you cannot remember falling asleep means there's a genuine, regular gap in your subjective experience that you are completely unaware of every single night of your life. You experience yourself as one continuous being, living through a single connected thread of consciousness from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. But that thread is broken every night, and you never notice, because the part of you that would notice the break is the exact same part of you that goes offline. You are simply absent for roughly 8 hours out of every 24 top. And you have no felt sense of that absence whatsoever, because feeling, the absence of consciousness, would itself require consciousness. The ancient Greeks intuited something close to this thousands of years ago. Aristotle described sleep as a state suspended somewhere between living and not living. The Greeks associated sleep with the god Hypnos, whose twin brother happened to be Thanatos, the god of death. Not because sleep was seen as dangerous, but because there was something quietly unsettling about the nightly suspension of the self. You go to sleep, and in some meaningful sense, you simply stop. And then something that claims to be you, carrying your memories and your personality, picks up exactly where things left off the next morning, with no direct memory of the gap in between. Most of us are perfectly fine with this arrangement, because we wake up feeling like the same continuous person, memories intact, personality unchanged. The feeling of continuity is preserved, even though a genuine discontinuity is baked into every single night. But the feeling of continuity and the actual fact of continuity are not quite the same thing. And that's the kind of question that sounds like philosophy homework, until you've had way too much caffeine and find yourself lying awake at 2 a.m. thinking about it. Stop. Let's go back to the hypnic jerk for a moment, because it deserves more attention than it usually gets, and because it's such a perfect example of your brain being completely unhinged in a way you've simply normalized over your entire life. You're lying there, calm, drowsy, drifting, pop. Your muscles are gradually relaxing, a process your brain is deliberately initiating as part of preparing for sleep. Your heart rate is slowing. Your breathing is getting shallower. Everything is proceeding exactly according to plan. And then, out of nowhere, your brain panics. In one of the most spectacular examples of a system catastrophically misreading its own situation. Part of your transitioning nervous system interprets that sudden drop in muscle tension as evidence that your body is actually falling, not lying down deliberately, but falling. So it fires off a rapid, uncontrolled emergency signal through your motor system, essentially screaming at every major muscle group to catch yourself immediately. Hence the jerk, hence the gasp, hence the extremely undignified full-body flail that has startled sleeping partners throughout the entirety of human history. One popular theory suggests this is a primitive reflex, a leftover from ancestors who once slept in trees, where a sudden loss of muscle tension really could have meant a dangerous fall, making a reflexive grab response genuinely useful for survival. Stop. Whether or not, that's the full explanation. The reflex clearly never got the memo that humans eventually moved indoors and started sleeping in beds on flat, stable ground. It still fires anyway, every so often, making you look completely ridiculous in front of anyone unlucky enough to be watching. And here's the twist that connects it right back to everything we've covered. Even when a hypnic jerk violently wakes you up, stop. You usually still don't remember whatever hypnagogic images or sounds your brain was hallucinating in the seconds right before it happened. That entire preceding experience has already been lost. The jerk startles you awake, you're briefly confused, maybe a little embarrassed, and within a minute or two, you're drifting straight back off, right back into the exact same process you have zero memory of going through moments earlier. Your brain runs this loop over and over throughout the night and stores none of it. Sleep researchers have spent decades waking people up at different points during sleep onset and simply asking them to describe what they were just experiencing, and the results are genuinely illuminating. Wake someone up during the very earliest hypnagogic phase, right at the start of stage 1, and they typically report fragmented, disconnected imagery, a single face, a color, a shape, with absolutely no narrative attached to it. No story, no continuity, just isolated visual fragments floating past. Go a little deeper, and the reports start getting stranger. Scenes begin acquiring more detail. There's sometimes a half-formed sense of place. Sounds start appearing. Occasionally, there's a fleeting awareness of something resembling a logical plot, the beginning of what feels like a dream. But it dissolves almost instantly, the moment the person is woken up. Ask them to describe it 30 seconds later, and it's already slipping away. Ask a minute later, and it's gone completely. This is basically the opposite of how we normally think about dreaming. With full REM sleep dreams, the ones that happen deeper into the night, there's at least a real chance you'll remember them, especially if you wake up during or right after one. The hypnagogic experiences at sleep onset are so fragile, so loosely encoded, that they essentially exist only for the moment they occur and then evaporate completely. In a sense, they're the least sticky memories your brain ever produces, which is genuinely saying something given how unreliable human memory already is in general. What this all means is that you have a nightly experience that is genuinely psychedelic, bizarre, and entirely your own, and you will almost certainly carry zero evidence of it into the morning. Night after night, your brain produces its own private light show and then immediately destroys the tape. So let's put the entire chain together. You cannot remember falling asleep because it involves a cascading, overlapping series of processes that quietly dismantle the exact conditions memory needs before you're even fully unconscious. Adenosine, melatonin, and a whole cascade of neurochemistry gradually tip your brain away from wakefulness. Your hypothalamus flips the arousal system toward off. Your thalamus closes the gate on incoming sensory information, cutting the data stream your cortex relies on to build conscious experience in the first place. Your hippocampus shifts away from encoding anything new and starts its own overnight maintenance work. Your acetylcholine levels collapse, taking the memory glue down with them. Your prefrontal cortex, the most executive part of you, the part responsible for self-awareness and monitoring your own experience, powers down among the very first. And somewhere in the middle of all of that overlapping shutdown, the part of you that could have recorded any of it simply stops existing before the experience is even finished. The hypnagogic hallucinations come and go completely unremembered. The hypnic jerk fires and fades. Your brainwaves slow from alert beta through relaxed alpha into drowsy theta, and the entire transition happens without a single witness. By the time you're fully asleep, every system that would have been needed to document the journey there has already been switched off. It might look like a flaw at first glance, a strange gap in the system, an unexplained absence. But it isn't a malfunction at all. It's the system working exactly as it was built to. Your brain isn't failing to capture the moment you fall asleep. It's actively choosing sleep over documentation every single time, without exception. The evolutionary reason. One more time. That trade genuinely makes sense once you frame it this way. A brain that stayed alert enough to record every second of its own shutdown would be a brain that never fully shuts down at all and never gets the deep, restorative maintenance sleep actually exists to provide. So, evolution made a quiet, permanent bargain. Roughly 8 hours of total absence in exchange for a repaired, consolidated, fully functional version of you the next morning. Memory of the transition itself was simply never part of the deal. The next time you find yourself wondering exactly where the night went, remember what actually happened behind the scenes. Your brain didn't just flip a switch and shut off. It performed an entire complex, chemically choreographed vanishing act, closing the thalamic gate, taking your hippocampus offline, draining your acetylcholine, hallucinating briefly in the dark, possibly throwing in one dramatic hypnic jerk for good measure, and shutting down region by region, all to give you a rested, functional version of yourself by morning. You will fall asleep thousands upon thousands of times over the course of your life. You will never remember a single one of those moments. And somehow, that's completely fine, if diving into the hidden mechanics of your own mind like this is your kind of thing. Go check out our other video on the science of dreams, linked right there on screen, because it picks up exactly where this one leaves off. Until next time, stay curious and sleep well.